The purpose of this lesson is to teach you the basics of how to include forms on your website. The purpose of a form is to allow interactivity with a website in a way that allows a user to enter data into fields and have those fields sent to a program that exists on the server for processing. What I've done is I created a new HTML document. I call it form_basics.html. It just includes my standard document format. So I have my head with a blank style, I have a title, I have the header, I have my nav section, content, footer. So it's just our standard basic page layout. And over here you can see that the document is just blank. So what I am going to do is I'm going to start including form elements and form controls on my page. A form starts with the form element, and a form will have a name, and I'm going to call this something like Contact Us. Now, the name of the form is used for the browser itself, but there's also another element that I need to include, which is called ID, and it's typically going to be the exact same thing. And the purpose for this is the ID is going to be used for our CSS elements so that we can format these. The name will be used for older web browsers that don't necessarily understand CSS elements. The next thing that our form control has is something that is called a method, and we have two different types of methods that we can play with. The first one is a get method, G-E-T, and the second one is a post method. Both of these are useful in certain situations. Sometimes one is better than the other one. We are going to play with the get method today, but I will explain to you what the post method does. A get method will include all of the variables that are in all of the fields. So let's say I have a field to ask for somebody's name, one to ask for the email address, one for the telephone number, one for their website address. Those become variables based on the form. In the post method, when I submit the information from the form, it will be embedded in the body of the TCP/IP packets. But in a get method, they actually become part of the URL. Now, if I'm doing something like submitting my credit card information, I would not want to use a get method because I don't want that being sent in clear text. I don't want my credit card number remaining in history, so I would want to use the post method. But if I'm writing a website where I want to generate pages based on some sort of variable name, then the get method would be more useful. So for the purpose of this lesson today, I'm going to use the get method, but be aware that the post method is typically going to be the way that you would submit data from a form. Alright, the next thing that we need to do is we need to include an action. And the action is going to be what is the name of the program that is going to be used that will receive the data from this form. For the purpose of this form, I created a basic PHP script. That PHP script exists on the server under pringleteach.com/CIT155. So what I'm going to have to do is I'm going to have to use the entire URL for this. So http://pringleteach.com/CIT155/form-demo.php. Now you are going to be using this exact same script when you design your page, so make sure you note that entire path. Okay, and then our form has a closing tag, and it is a container tag, therefore the rest of the things go inside of it. Okay, so just to recap real quick, we have these form controls that has a beginning and an end. It is a container. We'll have other elements inside in a few minutes. We give it a name for the older browsers to understand what the name of this form is. We give it an ID for the newer browsers that understand what to do with CSS. We give it a method which tells the browser how to submit this stuff to the server, whether it gets embedded in the body of the body of the packets, or if it gets sent as part of the URL. And the action is just simply the program that is going to receive the output from all of these elements that are in our form. I want to start putting information in my form, and I'm going to actually create it wrong to begin with, and then later in this lesson I will show you the proper way to format it. And what I mean by that is I'm going to use line breaks after each of my lines just to make it look nice for now, but it's not the proper way to do it because I want to actually be able to use CSS to style it. So please keep in mind that what I'm doing at the beginning here is just for you to be able to see what the HTML form is doing, but we don't really want to use line breaks. Alright, so what I am going to do is I'm going to include my first thing in my form. I'm going to ask somebody for their email address. And so it's just simply going to be a form that has a label that says email, and then the next thing is going to be an input. So I'm going to give them a means to put something in. What type of input am I asking for? Well, I am asking for an input type of text. I am going to give this form a name. I'm sorry, this form control a name, and its name is just simply going to be email. And once again, this is for the purpose of my older browsers so that they know what to do with this particular element. But what I really want to use so that I can manipulate this with CSS is to give it an ID, and the ID is also going to be email. The last thing that I want to do is, if this is a field that is required for somebody to fill out on the server, on the form, then I want to tell the browser, hey, this field is required, so that way they can't submit a form without filling in specific values. And the way that I do that, I just simply say required equals required. Close my tag, and when I save and refresh, I now have something that looks like an input field. Alright, the thing is that what I want it to do is I want it to put email in the box, name in the box, telephone number in the box, and so forth. The catch is going to be that for me to get it in that manner using just HTML, I'm going to have to use line breaks. If I did not put a line break, what it would do is put email, the box, name, the box, telephone number, and start wrapping from there, and it's not necessarily going to look nice. I'm going to show you what it would look like if I didn't use line breaks. So I'm going to ask for this person's name. So let's say name, and then we will give them an input, and its type is going to be text. Its name will be equal to, and the catch here is going to be that whatever I name this is what the server is going to have to expect. So I'm going to call it name, but the thing is that in certain programming languages, name is a reserved word, and therefore we can't use name. For the purpose of this exercise, PHP should allow it, so we'll try it. If it won't, we may have to change the name. But for right now, I'm just going to leave these as they are, and I'm going to call this name for the ID. Alright, and then is it required? Yes, this is going to be required, so we'll say required equals required. And that's it. So now we have a second element. Now if I come over here and refresh, you'll see I have name and then email address, and they're side by side. So this is where I was saying that I want to include a line break. So that way they go like this. Not necessarily as pretty as I would like for it to be, but we will fix that here in just a couple of minutes. Alright, so I have some other things that I want to include, which are going to be the buttons at the bottom to submit the values. So I'm going to include a line break, and I'm going to include another input. Now this one does not get a separate label, so I'm not going to put the name and the email to the side. Instead, what I'm going to do is say input type equals, and then the type is going to be submit. Okay, so now what this gives to me is a button that just simply says submit query. Alright, now I don't necessarily want it to say submit query, so what I can do is I can change the value of what is in that field by saying value equals something just like submit. Refresh, now it just says submit. If I wanted this to say click here, I can do that. So whatever is in this value field is what really would be in the box over here for the submit button. Alright, the other type that I want to create is going to be what's called a reset button. And so I'm going to put a space and then another input. This type is going to be reset. And there we go. So now we have a submit button and a reset button. Now what the submit button will do is take whatever's in these fields and it will submit it to whatever the action is, which is this particular program. The reset button will be if I have data that's in these fields, when I reset, it clears out the fields, puts it back to the default state. Alright, so I'm going to put in a couple of more input fields. The next thing that I want to include is going to be what is the person's website address. So once again, this is going to be a text type input. The name is going to be website. And I forgot my quotes. The ID is going to be website. And is this one required? No, it's not required because not everybody that visits the site will have a website. Alright, so the next thing that I want to include is a comment. And this one's text for now. We will change this one in a few minutes. And this one is going to be required because the whole purpose of somebody contacting us is to provide some sort of information to us. So we'll say that this one's required. And I forgot to include my line breaks after these, so we will include those for now. And so now we have something like this. Now if you notice, it doesn't look very pretty because these are not lined up right. So the way that we used to handle this is we would actually put this whole thing inside of a table, and we would have a 2-column table with 4 rows, and this would be the first column, this would be the second column, this would be second row, first column, second row, second column, and so forth. And the idea was is we just had some way to finagle it so that way it actually fit in right. Well, in reality, we don't really want to do that because a table should just strictly be used for tabular data, not for formatting. So because I now have CSS available to me, we are going to learn how to format this thing using CSS. But before we do that, we're going to include some other types of elements. The next thing that I want to include is going to be a hard-coded value. And what I want to do is I want to state who submitted this. Okay, now in reality, what we would actually do is something like send what the name of the browser is, or the person's IP address or something like that, so we know where the request came from. But in this case, I want to just simply include an input type that is hidden. And the idea here is that I can send a value from this form to the server without the user actually inputting this value, and on top of it not even be able to see what it is. Now, the thing is they can see this if they look at the view source, but just looking at the form, they won't see it. Alright, so just like everything else, I have to give it a name, and it's going to be submitted _by, and its ID will also be submitted _by, and then I will give it a value. Now, its value is going to be my name. Alright, so now what happens is when I refresh the page over here, you will not see it refreshing. But if I view the source and I come down and look at it, I will actually see it, that input is here. So you don't want to use anything like putting a password into a hidden field because somebody will look at the source code and see it. But it's just simply there for us to send information to the server without the end user being able to change it, and on top of it without them being able to see it in the form. It's just simply for some sort of value, like I said, setting the browser type. The next thing that I want to do is I want to ask this person for their gender. Alright, so if I just simply say gender, spell it right, and I ask them to input their gender as text, then what's going to happen is they are going to type in whether they're male, female, M, F, capital M, lowercase m, capital F, lowercase f. And if I'm trying to use that information on the server to form, let's say, statistical analysis of the data that's being sent to find out how many women submitted it and so forth, I would have to account for all of the different ways that they possibly could have written male or female. And on top of that, if they misspelled it, then I'd have some other things that are wrong. So instead of allowing them to enter this as text, I want to use what is called a radio button. And a radio button is going to be the circles where I have the name of something and then the little dot beside it. And what I want to do with it is I want to allow it where you can only select one of those items. Okay, so this radio button is going to have a name, and its name is going to be gender, and its ID will also be gender. And for this first one, it's going to have a value of male. Okay, and then what I say is male, and then my line break. Okay, and then my second one is going to be input type equals radio. Name this time is still gender. Its ID is still equal to gender. And the value this time is going to be equal to female. And female. Okay, so when I refresh the page, you'll see I now have a male and a female. Now the thing is by them both having the same name, then what I am doing is I am binding these two together. So what happens is I'm telling the system, these two are my gender field, but when I click one of these, the value for this gender variable will become whichever one is selected. Okay, so I want to select male or female, but I can only select one at a time. I can't select both. This is the purpose of a radio button. Now the other type that I could have used here is a checkbox. The problem with a checkbox is going to be that I can select one or more at the same time. If I had 10 different items, I would allow the user to select all 10 by using a checkbox, but by using a radio button, they can only select one at a time. I mentioned about this comment box, which actually should be comments. And what I mentioned about the comments box is that we're going to change this. Okay, so let's imagine I really did go to a website where I wanted to fill out a form and I wanted to write a paragraph worth of information. I only have a text box to write that in. I can only see a little piece of a line at a time. So what I want to do is instead of using a text box, I want to do something a little bit different. I want to use a different type of control, and to do this, what I am going to do is remove this input type and instead replace it with what's called a text area. Okay, now my text area is going to have a name, and its name is still going to be comments. It will have an ID, which is still going to be comments. And the thing that's going to be different now is going to be that I need to specify how wide and how tall it is. Alright, so our text area is defined in width as to how many columns wide it is, meaning how many characters can I fit side by side. Alright, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to specify how many calls it is, how many columns, and we'll set this equal to 40 columns wide. So it'll allow me to have 40 characters side by side. And then I can specify how many rows it is. So how tall is it? How many lines of text tall can I have? So I'll say rows is equal to 3. And then that gives me my text area. But the thing is a text area is actually a container element, which means that I have to close it. Okay, now if you notice it is a container element, which means that I can put information in here. So I can say something like enter comments. Enter comments here. Okay, and then when I come over here and refresh the page, I now get a box that says enter comments here. Alright, so I need my line break. Refresh, and there we go. Okay, so let's see. We're going to make a couple of changes here real quick. So we don't want a line break between male and female. Bring those both up on the same line so that we have them side by side. And alright, so I want to do some other things. I want to make this a little prettier. We're going to work our way into getting this thing all nice and lined up. Alright, I'm filling out the form on the website. I want to enter comments. I start here, type my name, I type my email address, I go to the website, and then I click here and I start typing my comment. And you will notice that it does not automatically start over typing the stuff that is in that box. So what I want to do with this is either use JavaScript to get it that as soon as I click in the box that it automatically highlights the whole thing and deletes what's in there, or I'm going to simply leave out this enter comments here. And by doing that, I now get my text area that is still 40 columns wide, it's 3 rows tall, nothing is inside of here. Now I don't have to worry about the user clicking inside of there. So we prompt them over here as to what it is, but this right here is just simply going to be where they type the information. Now if you notice on the right here, we do have a horizontal scroll bar, so I'm sorry, a vertical scroll bar, so they actually will be able to scroll up and down through all of the text that they type. It will wrap the text as they go along. Alright, so a couple more things that we can play with. I'm going to get rid of these colons here because it looks like it's backwards. Alright, so I have these things here that are what I look at as being the label for this little text box here. And so what I want to do is I want to start providing information for accessibility purposes. What I mean by that is that when somebody goes to the website and they start filling this form out, if we have a user that is not able to see very well, they're vision impaired, then what will happen is they will have a program called a screen reader. And the screen reader will go through the form, and it'll just simply say form basics, home, name, email, website, comments, gender, male, female, submit, reset, copyright, and so forth. It will not do anything with these boxes. But if I tell it that this is a label for this text box, then what it will do is it'll say form basics, home, name, and then waiting for input. Then when they type out information here, then it will say email and wait for input. Then it will say website, wait for input, and so forth. So what I want to do is I want to provide some information to let the system know, hey, this is a label for a specific thing. And the way that I do this is around where it says name, I'm going to type label. And then what is the label for? The label is for this text area called name. Okay, and it goes all the way over here. So what I now look at is I can see that name belongs to the label for the name text field. I can do the same thing with this one, so we'll say label for, and in this case it is email, and then we close this. Do the same thing for this one. Do the same thing for our comments. We do the same thing for gender, and then also for our submit. So I'm going to put the last one here around gender. Okay, so now I refresh my page. The page doesn't look any different, but what I just did is I made it where somebody that's vision impaired can now tell what these fields are. Now, remember when I did the required equals required? What you'll notice is if I hover over name, you'll see a little tooltip pop up that says this is a required field. What will happen is if I don't type something in this name field and I try to submit this form, it will actually throw an error telling me that I missed a required field. What happened back before HTML5 was that I would actually have to use JavaScript to validate each field on my form to make sure that the user actually typed in something they were supposed to put on the page. By using this required equals required, I now do away with that requirement for using JavaScript. Now HTML5 will not validate that what I entered actually looks like an email address. It will just simply validate that I really did enter information into the email field. Now that we have our basic types of fields that are on here, I want to start making it look a little bit better. Alright, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to take my entire form and I'm going to tab it over, and what I want to do is I'm actually going to enclose this in another type of container element called a field set. And what a field set is nothing more than just simply providing a box around my form so that I can break it up visually to see that this is where we have a text area. I'm sorry, a form area. Alright, so what I want to do is I want to, in my field set, include a thing called a legend. And my legend is going to be something like, please enter your information. Okay, so now what I've done when I refresh is I get this box that appears around my form, and the legend appears right here that says please enter your information. So if I have multiple things on my page and I want to break it up into different types of form sections, I can have different field sets. Each one can have its own legend, but the purpose is for me to be able to actually break them up and make them look nicer. Now what this does though is it actually will allow me to identify this form area, and now I can manipulate it by using CSS. So if I come up here into my head, I can start adding style elements to actually format that field set. To do this, I'm going to just simply say field set, because it is a field set. And how do I want it formatted? I want it formatted like this. Okay, so I want to set its width to, let's say 500 pixels. Hopefully that's enough. As long as you use it the same way. Alright, so its border, we'll do like a 2 pixel solid red border around it. I can do something like set its font family to Arial. And if I don't have Arial, then we'll use any sans serif font that's installed. And I can do things like I want to increase the padding, because if you notice in here, this name is pretty close to that line. So I want to increase the padding a little bit. And we'll set that to 10 pixels. Okay, refresh the page. And now I have a field set that I have actually manipulated. If you notice, this is Times New Roman. This is Times New Roman. This down here is Times New Roman. But the stuff that's contained within my field set, which all of this is in the field set, is a specific font, which is Arial. Okay, so now I want this to be bold, where it says please enter your information. Well, that's our legend. So I can take the legend and I can do something like font weight and set it to bold. Now remember, we have this thing called inheritance. Okay, so this thing is a legend, but it is also part of the field set. So because it's part of the field set and the font family was set to Arial, it will remain Arial, but then it will also, because it's a legend, it will also make it bold when I refresh. So it didn't change the font because it inherited the font from the field set, but it added the bold on top of that attribute for the field set. Alright, so now it's time to start making it look a little prettier. I'm going to go back down and through here, and I told you at the beginning that I should not be using these line breaks, and I'm going to show you why here in just a minute, but for now I'm going to remove them and show you what it'll look like without those here. Alright, so refresh my page. That's what it looks like, a big old jumbled mess. Now here's the deal, is that I want to format this thing strictly using CSS to have the field labels on the left and have the input boxes on the right. But I want the input boxes to be lined up nice and neat. And so what I am going to do is I need to use CSS to format these things. If you notice this name, I told you about accessibility, we called it a label. Well, because I called it a label, I can also format it based on it being a label. Okay, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to create a CSS declaration up here for label, and then the way that I want to style the label is going to be listed here. The first thing that I need to declare is going to be that I want the label on the left side of all of the inputs. And I want each label to be on its own line. And we played with our float before, where we floated graphics. We took images and put them to the left and allowed the text wrap to the right. Well, if I take my label and I float it to the left, then what will happen is it will put the label to the left of all the input boxes. Helps if you save. And do this. Now all of my labels are on the left. Okay, still a jumbled mess, but we'll fix that in just a second. Alright, so what I want to do to fix this is I'm actually going to do what's called a clear. And what a clear is every time a label gets displayed, we want it to force a line break. So I'm going to clear these to the left. And so now what happens when I refresh is I get something like this. So now every time there's a label, we get a line break. Alright, the problem is that right now my labels, my inputs, my text area, my radio buttons, everything that I've put on the page in this form is an inline element. Nothing will cause more line breaks. Okay, so what's going to happen is for me to cause these things to act like a block level element, I need to start telling it to do that. Alright, so what's going on is right now on the left hand side I have caused all of my labels to be floated to the left. I've caused all of these to cause a line break. But all of these things over here don't necessarily line up quite right. So what I need to do is I need to tell it that all of my labels, all of my input areas, my text areas, I need all of these things to be a block level element instead of an inline element. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to specify that my label will be displayed as a block level element. Now the catch is I'm also going to have to do this for the inputs and for the text area. Okay, so remember I can do multiple items at the same time by just simply listing both of them. So I'll say these are both display as block. And so now what I'm doing is I'm telling them when you display these things, display them as a block level element instead of an inline element. The other thing that I want to do with these is I want to make a little bit of a margin so that every line has a little bit of a line break. So I'm going to say margin top is going to be 10 pixels, which if I do it there, I'm also going to have to do that for the labels. All right, come over here and refresh the page, and now I have something that looks like this. Alright, so now what I have done is I have forced it that every time that there's an input, we treat the name as a block level element, we treat the text box as a block level element. And then we do the same thing with all the different elements. So we'll work on fixing these all here in just a minute. I want to make them all look nicer. The way that we're going to do this is by playing with a couple of more things. Like right now we have these labels that are floated to the left. Well, then we need these text boxes to be pushed over so far in the page. To set how far these boxes should be over, what I want to do is I want to take this thing that is name, which is a label that's supposed to be an inline element, which means that it does not cause a line break, it does not take up a specific amount of space, but I am treating it like a block level element. And because I am doing this, I can actually specify how wide this is. So I'm going to say its width is 100 pixels. And by doing this, imagine drawing a box around name, and by specifying the width, I can now force the other elements over past where these are. So what you'll notice is now that I have name and its text boxes here, which is still required, email, its text box, website, its text box, and so forth. So what I'm doing is I'm starting to format elements in such a way that it will allow me to put them on separate lines or side by side, however I want to do that. I want to make the gender look a little bit better. So what I have done is, remember, our inheritance can be overridden in our different CSS styles. So what I am going to do is I'm going to take this input type here. So inputs right now are displayed as block level elements, but if you remember, this gender input type had a specific name, and its specific name was gender. I'm sorry, an ID called gender. Alright, so what I want to do is I'm going to take my other inputs and I'm going to give them a name. So I'm going to give my submit box an input type of submit, or an ID of submit, and I will give my reset box an ID of reset. Okay, so I haven't really changed anything in my form yet, but what I just did is I allowed myself to come up here and specify that I want the gender to be displayed inline instead of as a block level element. So I'm going to say gender, and I want to change this display from block to inline. So even though gender is a type of input that is displayed as block, it will come down here and then it will turn it back into an inline element. So if I save and refresh, now I get gender that shows up like this. So now that my form looks nice, I want to actually submit some information. So if I were to come in here and actually submit this, what's going to happen is when I click submit, it is going to send the information over to the server, which is located at this website address, and it will actually display some information back to me. Now the catch is that whenever I really do this on a real server, I have to have this file existing out on the server, because a PHP file will not run on my local computer unless I have PHP installed. So what you're going to need to do is upload this file to the server to test it and make sure that everything works. Alright, so let's go ahead and try this and make sure that the form actually works. Before I submit it, I'm going to maximize the screen so you can see what's going on. And I'm going to fill out my name, my email address, and this is my form. I am male, and then I'm going to submit this. Remember, when I click submit, if you look at the bottom left, you actually see where it is going to send this information. So it will send it to http://www.pringleteach.com/CIT155/formdemo.php. Now, you're going to use the exact same location. That's going to be your action. And when I submit it, if you watch, it is going to take a second because it sends the stuff up to the server. The server has to process that information, and then it actually will take the information and put it into the form. Alright, so here's the thing, is that I submitted this information using a get method, and if you notice, my comment didn't show up and my submitted by didn't show up. And we'll have to play with those in just a minute. But what I want to show to you is actually this up here is the file that we used, is formdemo.php. And notice there's a question mark here. And the question mark signifies that everything else that comes after this is going to be a variable. Okay, so there is a variable called name whose value is Brian Pringle. And that's what gets displayed here. Notice there's a plus sign in the middle. PHP will interpret that to be a space. Okay, there is another variable called email whose value is currently set to brian.pringle@kctcs.edu, which is what got displayed here. Then the next thing is website, and that is our school email, school website. Then comments, and here's the thing, is that I have, this is my form, and what happens is because I called it comments, it may be a reserved word, and if it's a reserved word, the system will not know what to do with it. So we may have to come up with a different name for it. Alright, so we'll fix that in just a minute. Gender is male. Now I did not type male, but because that was the value for that input, if I selected male, then that's what actually got sent up. And if you notice, the submitted by is my name. That was that hidden field, and that still got sent up to the server. So what I need to do is I need to correct the script on the server, and we'll see if we can fix it. Alright, so I've corrected the problem, and the reason for it is that in my HTML, my name for the comments field is comments, and in the PHP script I had it set as comment without the S, so it wasn't looking for the right variable name. And the other problem was just simply a typo for the submitted by field. So it is working now. So what happens is now I see that my name, email address, website address, the comment, and all that stuff is there. The server received it all just simply by this, this string up here. It takes information out of this and it puts it down into here. Now what this means is that I could, if I want to, replace this with anything else. This is why a get string is insecure. So I'm going to say that my name is Bob Smith. And send it, and now it's Bob Smith. I don't necessarily have to get the information out of a form by using a get string. I can just simply generate a new string, and then information will get received by the server. The purpose of this class is not to show you how to do the PHP, but simply how to use a form to get data up to the PHP script. So just know there is a difference between a get and a post method. The get method is a lot less secure, but it's easier for us to see what's going on. So in this lesson, you learned how to create an HTML form. You learned about the different types of methods. You learned how to use an action. You learned how to create a text input, a text area, a radio button. We talked about the difference between a radio button and a checkbox. We talked about using CSS to format the form. And then we also talked about how to submit the data and how to reset it.